Hey there, welcome to another episode of Dear Parents. Today we have a listener question. Now, this comes from a mom named Danielle, and she is asking about how to handle big meltdowns and aggressive moves in kids that are kind of school aged. So we talk a lot and we think a lot about, meltdowns and managing big movements and big feelings in the toddlers, and they're 30 pounds, and you can pick them up and move them, or you can hold them tight and give them a big bear hug, or let them work through their storm. But for bigger kids, it presents a real challenge of, how do I keep them safe, how do I keep myself safe, how do I keep their siblings safe, our home and property and those sorts of things safe. And so we're going to talk through that. So I'm going to let her ask her question. And if you have questions, the easiest thing to do is go to dearparents.substack.com. There's a little Ask Me Anything button right there. You can record your question. I'll do my best to answer it as quickly as possible. Here's Danielle's question.
Hi, my name's Danielle. Thanks so much for taking these questions. So my question is about our 6-year-old son who is really big and strong and has some extra sensory needs in terms of like proprioceptive, like jumping, crashing, just like more intense stimuli. Um, he is, yeah, really big and strong, over 4 feet tall, almost 90 pounds. He looks more like a big third grader than a 6-year-old. Um, we realized he needed this like extra sensory stimuli when he was like 2.5, 3. Back then, manifesting in a lot of like hitting, biting, stuff like that. We worked with OTs and pediatricians and teachers and all this stuff. And for whatever it's worth, in our house, we listen to a lot of you and Dr. Becky, and we're very much using all the authoritative parenting tactics. So that's very much our approach to begin with. My question is really like, of all the content I've consumed, and I've read a bunch of books and podcasts and all the things, no one really speaks to these kiddos that are like having these behaviors, these like really physical behaviors, but they're really big and strong. Like I feel like everything written about these types of behaviors like assumes that your kid is like a 2 or 3-year-old who can be physically restrained really easily. So I guess question is like two parts, kind of. Is like, what do you do on a daily level just for these kids to help regulate their nervous systems? Like we do, we have crash pads, we do wrestling, we have all of our sensory toolkit that we try to go to. But then also in these big dysregulated moments where he's hitting, kicking, like lashing out, and he's just really dysregulated, like the normal how to restrain a 2, 3-year-old like does not apply to a kid this big. I'm almost out of time, so I'll leave it there. But thanks so much for your answer.
All right, so for me, this is a very common question and concern because, yes, a lot of the books and podcasts and things like that spend a lot of bit of time talking about how to help toddlers in those moments where we know at the end of the day, like they can only throw so hard, they can only punch and scratch and kick and those sorts of things, and we can often restrain them, give them bear hugs, keep them safe. But when we have a 90-pound kid, or bigger, and they're tall and they can take a swing at you or take a swing at a sibling or throw something, we need to help figure out how to protect everybody in that situation. Now, one of the things that Danielle said that she's doing, which is really helpful, is addressing those sensory needs, because oftentimes in children that have sensory processing challenges, they will get emotionally dysregulated and the body treats that as a threat. And so you respond in a way that you would if you were actually threatened. If your bodily, harm was at stake, you respond in big ways with aggression. You respond before you're thinking. You're throwing something, you're, taking a swing at someone, you're breaking something before you can even think through and calm down. Now, what Danielle said that they're doing is a lot of preventative work, which is great and super necessary. And they already figured out that that's really helpful, because a lot of the sensory issues that we face, we have to be preventative, meaning we have to put those into consideration every single day of like, what are we doing proactively? Because they're in the moment, they're melting down, they're screaming, they're getting ready, to take a swing at someone or throw something, is not the time that you're going to get them to go jump on their crash pad, or use their slack board or do something else to kind of get some sensory input in. The sensory input is preventative in that we have to do it in advance on a daily basis at those times of day when we typically would see bigger emotions start to come out. So we get home from school and we have our protein rich snack, and then we do some sort of sensory input, whether it's jumping on the crash board, whether it's, doing some balancing, whether it's some big movements or any of those sorts of sensory bucket filling activities. We're going to do that preventatively so that then as we get into our evening routine, we've got homework, we've got dinner, we've got siblings that are all, doing their things to help or make it harder. We're going to have those preventative buckets filled in advance. And so that's one part of the big picture. Sensory input really isn't the fire extinguisher. It's really something that we have to do to fill those buckets up to help prevent moving on. Another thing that's great for bigger kids too is getting them to do heavy work. So I'm thinking about laundry baskets. I'm thinking about moving things around the house, whether or not they need to be moved. Those are great ways to fill that sensory input in those bigger kids and actually get help. Like, hey, can you move this for me? Hey, can you move that for me? I've been meaning to take this downstairs. There's all sorts of ways that you can get more sensory input while helping them feel important. Like, hey, we have a water softener. We have to take these 40-pound bags of salt downstairs. Our third grader, our fourth grader, our fifth grader are big enough to help actually do that. And they get some sensory input and they feel like, hey, this is something that was really helpful. This is something that my family needed. I contributed in a positive way. Now, so that's all great. When we're in the crisis moment, it's going to be about safety of everybody in the situation. And so this is something that it's going to be a lot of knowing specifically about the safety issues that we're facing, but we're first going to make sure that in those moments that our child themselves can be safe and they can excuse themselves from the situation rather than getting a lecture, rather than being told not to do that, rather getting the big, why can't you just, or you better, or, sort of consequences. It's, hey, you're overstimulated. I can tell that you're really upset. Let's go over there. And you might take them and gently move them if you're able to, or allow them to move out of the situation without any judgment, without any shame, without any guilt at that moment. Because later we know we can talk about it and say, hey, you got really upset while we were making dinner tonight. You can say those sorts of things later, but it's really important in that moment that they have an escape hatch that they can go out of without feeling more shame, guilt, or those sorts of things. It's also moving others away and realizing that, hey, if I can move their siblings away, this might help to diffuse things just a little bit. This might help to calm things down. Now, when you're talking about this being a longstanding thing, I think it is really helpful to have the occupational therapy on board, the pediatrician on board, if they're getting to the age where they are still having a lot of difficulties with emotional dysregulation and with aggression, and it's spilling over out of the home into school or in the home, and it's causing significant family interference. I do think that's a reasonable thing to talk through with your pediatrician about what else can we do outside of just, trying to fill their sensory bucket. Some of the things that I think about, like in really emotionally dysregulated kids, a lot of them have ADHD, especially if they have sensory issues too. They have a lot of ADHD going on. And so how can we get a better handle on that? Maybe it's nutrition. Maybe it's making sure that they're getting good sleep. Maybe it's making sure that they're getting movement. But sometimes it is finding some medications that can help to put a little bit of time between thought and action. And that's really part of the ADHD executive functioning or executive dysfunction, really, is I need a little bit of time between the thought of throwing the remote and throwing the remote, between I really want to hit my sibling and, smacking them in the back or in the head or whatever it might be. And what happens when we do manage their emotional dysregulation aspect of ADHD, whether it's through nutrition, whether it's through sleep, whether it's through screen time management, whether it's through medications, what we see is that when we have that on board, they're able to put just a millisecond between thought and action. And then when you notice that, you can say, hey, I noticed that today you got really upset and you did not take a swing at your brother. And that seems like something that we shouldn't have to congratulate. Like that should just be kind of standard. But if that's not standard for your child, then it's worth congratulating when they're able to do that. So if we're big, if we're emotionally dysregulated, I want everyone to stay safe. And sometimes that does mean looking at the bigger picture of our child and not just saying, well, I can put all these parenting practices in a place and it's going to come around eventually. You've been doing the hard work. And so I would be keeping that in mind as we move forward. And then the last thing that I would say is, as parents, we have to be regulated in those moments too. And we have to look at it. I try and get parents, when I'm talking through it, especially when we're talking about authoritative parenting, you are firm, but you're also warm. And it's really hard to be warm if you don't have buckets full yourself. If you're not getting good sleep, if you're not getting good nutrition, if you're not staying hydrated, if you're not taking those practices into consideration for yourself, it's really hard to show up for your dysregulated child when you are dysregulated yourselves. And so I would really focus on, how can I show up and realize that, okay, these dysregulated moments are going to happen, but can I move them from emergency into spilled milk? Spilled milk is not an emergency. It's, oh, shoot, we spilled the milk. And if you can move to that sort of framework and mindset for yourself, then once we can see, okay, this is an emergency, we've moved to a place where we put these practices into place, we've got the buckets filled up, we're doing the things that we need to, how can I, as the parent, be more regulated? Then we often do see that the regulation that you have carries over and it spills over to your child. So in the big picture, make sure everybody's safe. Allow them to cool off. Usually you're not going to have hands-on kids this age unless they tell you, I need someone to hold me, I need a bear hug, something like that. You're going to move everybody away. You're going to take away the things that could be broken, and you're giving them a relief valve and an escape hatch so they can excuse themselves from the situation. Now, that doesn't excuse the behavior. We are going to go back and talk about it later, but in the moment is not the time to lecture, guilt, shame, or try and get them to change their behavior. We can do that later, not the guilting and shaming, but we can talk to them about it and come up with a strategy for next time later. But we're going to keep everyone safe in the meantime. We're going to fill their sensory buckets. We're going to talk with our pediatrician, our healthcare team about, is there something deeper going on here? Why are they not moving out of this dysregulated emotional state, which is more manageable and expected for the 3-year-old, 4-year-old. But when we get to 6, 7, 8, if they're still having these big aggressive moves, I want to make sure that we're not missing something, because it may spill over to school, and that may have more serious repercussions than smacking their brother on the back or tossing the remote or something along those lines. I also don't want them to get labeled inappropriately because we haven't fully addressed those things. So that was long-winded. I hope that makes sense, and I would love to answer more questions. If you have a question, click in the show notes, go to dearparents.substack.com, get your question answered, and keep up the good work.